Hello and welcome to my Yu-Gi-Oh channel. Make sure to subscribe for more daily Yu-Gi-Oh content. So today we're looking at some brand new cards which come out of Duel Links Antinomic Theory. This is a main box and we're going to be covering the rares. Kanzashi the Rake Queen is a water attribute plant type Xyz monster. It's a rank 6 with 2400 attack and 2400 defense. It requires 2 level 6 monsters and its effect is if a monster is tributed except during a damage step, you can detach one material from this card, then target one monster in either graveyard, special summon it but negate its effects. Also, it becomes a plant-type monster. If a plant-type monster you control would be destroyed by a card effect, you contribute one plant-type monster from your hand or field instead. You can only use each effect of Kanzashi the Rika Queen once per turn. This card is quite useful for the archetype. For starters, it's able to take your opponent's cards by simply detaching a material, and they get treated as a plant type. So that means even if your opponent is running various types of monsters, be it spellcaster, fairy, spellcaster, dragon, whatever you want, worm, cyverse, to list a few, if those are summoned and those end up in the graveyard, you can revive it, and actually you can sacrifice your monster which is classified as a plant type to protect one of your other plant type monsters. Has that double utility and it's very consistent in what it needs to do. Humming the Kijin is a water attribute fairy fiend type Xyz monster with 1100 attack and 1800 defense. It requires 2 level 3 monsters. When this card is special summoned, you can target one GNX monster in your graveyard, special summon it, then you can attach up to 2 cards from your hand to it as Xyz materials. Once per turn, you can detach one Xyz material from this card, then target one GNX monster you control. This turn it can attack your opponent directly. So this is actually really important for the Jin archetype. For starters, when it's summoned, you're instantly able to bring back one of your Jin monsters. They have different effects. One of them can attack twice. There's another one that can make its attack points 3000. There's another one who can increase its attack points by stealing your opponent's materials. And increasing it by about 500. So you've got a variety of different abilities you can rely upon. The ability to then reattach materials is also very useful. Xyz materials are essentially the things that give your Xyz monsters their effects. There are exceptions to the rule, and there are also vanilla-based Xyz monsters that don't ever rely on their Xyz materials except for their summoning. But for these, they do rely on their materials. And the ability to direct attack with Imagine Musa Rhythm. It is the monster that is able to attack. If it attacks directly, its attack is doubled to 3000. So you could end up the game right then and there. Shark Caesar is a water attribute fish type Xyz monster. It's rank 3 with 1800 attack and 2000 defense. It requires 3 or more, a maximum of level 3 monsters. Once per turn, you can detach one Xyz material from this card, place one shark counter on this. If this card attacks or is attacked, it gains 1000 attack for each shark counter on it during the damage step only. What's really good about this card is, at most, it can become a 6800 attack monster. Meeting the condition actually cannot be possible within Duel Links, because you can only have 3 monsters on the field at any one time. This is a massive concern. So it can become a maximum of 4800, but it does have to rely on you having several level 3 monsters on the field at the same time, and meeting those conditions means you're going to have to be relying on certain cards to get you those to begin with. It's a very powerful effect in that it's similar to something like you cannot destroy it in battle, because nothing is going to attack into this when they know it's just going to constantly gain attack points. Instead, they're going to want to either negate the effect and then attack over this card so it can't get the attack, or option B is to just destroy this with a spell or trap card or a monster effect. Either way, you might even want to get rid of the level 3 monsters before your opponent has the opportunity to go into anything. The next card is Battlecruiser Dianthus. This is an Earth attribute plant type Xyz monster. It's a rank 3 with 2100 attack and 1800 defense. It requires 3 level 3 monsters. You can detach one Xyz material from this card, inflict 200 damage to your opponent for each card in their hand, You can only use this effect of Battlecru's Dianthus once per turn. Right, so this card was actually seen within the anime. I'm not sure whether it's an actual physical card, because they have made some cards that have introduced into Duel Links that aren't actually in the physical game, so this might be one of those. It was used by a girl within the school for Yuma Tsukumo, where basically she became controlled by the Baryons, and she has this Xyz monster, and then it ranks up to a Chaos Xyz monster that's able to destroy number monsters which normally cannot be destroyed by anything other than other number monsters. The whole idea of the archetype based on this card is to be able to inflict points of damage based on the number of cards your opponent has in their hand. So it's constantly chipping away at your opponent, hopefully putting them in a position where they can no longer do anything. The effect is okay, because you can do, say maximum your opponent has a full hand on, and it's your turn first, and they've got 5 cards in their hand, you're doing 1,000 points of damage. The problem I've got is it halves the amount of damage because Duel Links, their condition, so it's only 100 points of damage now. And the other thing is, you do need 3 level 3 monsters to summon this monster, so meeting that condition as well for something that, outside of its effect, is essentially a vanilla monster, is just not worth it. Tech Genus Recipro Dragonfly is a wind attribute insect type synchro monster. It's a level 2 with 300 attack and 300 defense. It requires 1 tuner and 1 non-tuner monster. And the effect is, once per turn, when you can target one other Tech Genus synchro monster you control, send it to the graveyard, then if all the synchro monsters that were used for its synchro summon are in your graveyard, you can special summon all of them. This essentially lets you rip apart your Buster, which is a level, I think level 10, splits them into the different monsters, and then you can synchro summon into your Halberd Cannon, which is the level 12 synchro monster. That's the premise of this card. It's worth noting it can be more flexible than that, as it can let you go into any of the other Tech Genus cards. This is just the purest reason why it exists. GNX Ally Triarm is a dark attribute machine type synchro monster. It's a level 6 with 2,400 attack and 1,600 defense. It requires a GNX Controller and 1 or more non-tuner monsters to summon it. This card's effects depend on the attributes of its non-tuner synchro material monsters. Once per turn, you can discard 1 card to activate one of its effects. Wind attribute, send 1 random card from your opponent's hand to the graveyard. Water attribute, select 1 spell or trap card on the field and destroy it. Dark attribute, select 1 face-up light monster on the field, destroy it, and draw 1 card. Each of the abilities of this card are very useful and actually work in different situations. The wind ability, I would say, is probably the best, because sending a card from your opponent's hand, even though it's random, means they're no longer able to use that card. Of course, you could end up sending something that has a graveyard effect and then triggers something like Ancient Stone for the Blue Eyes deck, but otherwise it's a decent enough effect to lower your opponent's ability to use resources. It does mean it is a 1-for-1, you are trading 1 card for one of your opponent's cards, but if you're in the driver's seat, it's a win harder card. The water ability to be able to just constantly get rid of back row cards is also very useful. Some archetypes rely on their spell and traps very generically as well. So it puts them in a situation where they can't afford to have this effect keep triggering. The final ability, and I think it's probably the most niche, is obviously being able to destroy face-up light monsters. That's fine if you're going against something like Blue Eyes White Dragon, but if you're facing a deck that is and has no light attribute monsters in it, you don't get that benefit of the draw and the destruction effect, so that is the most situational. Turbo Cannon is a fire attribute machine type synchro monster. It's level 3 with 0 attack and 0 defense. It requires a Turbo Rocket and 1 or more non-tuner monsters to summon it. Once per turn, you can destroy 1 face-up monster on the field and inflict damage to its controller equal to half of its attack. Right, this is an amazing effect to have, but it has its benefits and it has its weaknesses. For starters, massive weaknesses, it does half the amount of damage to your opponent. This is quartered, so it's a half and a half because of the whole restrictions on burn damage. But even forgetting that, the ability to just destroy and blind destroy a face-up monster on your opponent's field means you can actually get rid of their threatening cards and actually go into direct attacks with other monsters. It can also destroy your own cards, so if they have effects that can trigger off destruction, that's a good way of putting that into effect without having to rely too heavily on your opponent. My concern is, with 0 attack and 0 defense, it is very susceptible to just being purely run over by anything. You would need to run certain protection cards to stall your opponent and to prevent them from targeting this card. The other thing is, it does need a very specific monster in the form of Turbo Rocket, so you are going to have to rely on running certain styles of decks. And of course, it being a level 3 means you're going to have to run level 1s and level 2s to meet the condition of summoning it in the first place. Tech Genus Halberd Cannon Assault Mode is an Earth Attribute Machine type level 12 with 4,500 attack and 4,500 defense. The effect is it cannot be normal summoned or set. It must be special summoned with Assault Mode activate. You can only use each of the following effects of Tech Genus Halberd Cannon Assault Mode once per turn. When your opponent would summon a monster as a quick effect, you can negate the summon, and if you do, banish that monster and all special summoned monsters your opponent controls. When this card on the field is destroyed, you can target one Tech Genus Halberd Cannon in your graveyard, special summon it, ignoring its summoning conditions. This, if you're able to get it out, is incredibly impressive and very difficult to actually beat over. Consider this for a second. 4,500 attack. There are very few monsters that can exceed that just purely from an attack stat lineup. Even if it just goes to defense mode, you can stall your opponent out until they deck out, potentially. Summoning it is quite a nuisance because you have to get actually Halberd Cannon out first, and that needs a few monsters before it can be summoned. Specifically, it probably needs synchro monsters as well as non-tuner synchro monsters, which you only have a few within the deck. The archetype does work to sustain itself, but it does need quite a few cards in order to generate the necessary levels to meet that requirement. The ability is also really good because it's just whenever your opponent would not summon a monster, so that could be normal, flip summon, special summon. You can just negate the summon and then just punish your opponent by banishing all of their monsters. And the thing is, it just affects your opponent. It's not a clear wipeout of your monsters as well. And it being a quick effect means it can be activated during either turn, so if you can trigger something, wipe out everything your opponent has, and then you can attack for game. The other thing is, if your opponent is able somehow to get rid of this card, that's fine. You get your Halberd Cannon back, which is 4,000 attack and defense. If your opponent has put a lot of resources into just getting rid of this card, they're probably not going to be able to do that again with Halberd Cannon, at least on the same turn. Genus Cyber Magician is the light attribute spellcaster type tuner monster. It's a level 1 with 0 attack and 0 defense. Its effect is when using this card you control as a synchro material for a TG synchro monster, you can use Tech Genus monsters in your hand as non-tuner synchro materials. During the end phase, if this card is in the graveyard because it was destroyed on the field and sent there this turn, you can add one Tech Genus monster from your deck to your hand, except Tech Genus Cyber Magician. This card is one of the key cornerstones of the deck. This lets you get out a level 5 synchro monster really quickly. Genus Hyper Librarian, you've got that Star Guardian, you've got Wonder Magician, you've also got the one that does piercing damage as well, and all of those are level 5 synchro monsters, so you can easily have your Rush Rhino in your hand or one of the others, which is a level 4. And because you can just normal summon this card and just go into your synchro very quickly, immediately, without having to rely on needing to summon additional monsters or special summoning those cards to the field before you can actually tune with them. Erika the Rika Fairy is a water attribute plant type level 6 monster with 2,400 attack and 1,000 defense. The effect, when an attack is declared involving another plant type monster, you can tribute this card from your hand or face up on the field. That monster you control gains 1,000 attack and defense until the end of this turn. If a plant monster you control is tributed when this card is in your graveyard, except during the damage step, you can special summon this card in defense position, but banish it when it leaves the field. You can only use each effect of Erika the Rika Fairy once per turn. So what I love about this card is it's a level 6, 2,400 attack is fine, it meets the conditions, it can be summoned really easily, and then you gain the ability of an additional 1,000 points for its attack and defense. That means you can make your plant monsters a lot beefier. They can actually, if they've got additional effects, can trigger those off if they're battle-based. And the thing is, this can revive itself as well, although it does have to be in defense mode, and it does have the punishment that it has to be banished once it uses this effect and once it goes away. Hellebore, the Rika Fairy, is a water attribute plant type level 8 with 2600 attack and 1200 defense. The effect, when your opponent activates a monster effect that targets a monster you control, while you control a Rika monster, as a quick effect, you contribute this card from your hand or face up on the field, negate that effect. If this card is in your graveyard, you contribute one plant type monster, special summon this card in defense position, but banish it when it leaves the field. You can only use each effect of Hellebore, the Rika Fairy, once per turn. Okay, again, this is fine. It can instantly negate an effect. Actually, if you've just got this card in your hand, why would you use the effect if you've got it on the field? Because you've wasted resources in order to bring this card out to begin with. The other thing is, it does revive itself. Even though you do have to get rid of a plant-type monster, you can always use it for a rank 8 play. That way it's got double utility. Limbic, Malabranch of the Burning Abyss, is a dark attribute fiend type level 3 with 1300 attack and 700 defense. The effect is, if you control a monster that is not a Burning Abyss monster, destroy this card. You can only use one of these effects of Limbic, Malabranch of the Burning Abyss per turn, and only once that turn. If you control no spell or trap cards, you can special summon this card from your hand. If this card is sent to the graveyard, you can special summon one level 3 dark attribute fiend type monster from your hand, but its effects are negated. Like most of the Burning Abyss, they have this similar type of ability where they can special summon themselves. It's just to accelerate into rank 3 plays. It's a fine effect, but is it as useful as it used to be? Absolutely not. Especially the self-destruction effect. It doesn't work unless you can trigger something off of it. Chiribumi, Princess of Autumn Leaves, is an Earth attribute plant type level 8 with 1800 attack and 2800 defense. The effect is your opponent cannot target face-up plant type monsters for attacks, except this one. If this card in your possession is sent to your graveyard by your opponent's card, either by battle or by card effect, you can special summon one plant type monster from your deck, except Chiribumi, Princess of Autumn Leaves. I think this card is really good and really decent for what it does. It distracts your opponent's monsters from attacking some of your weaker plant types. Useful if they've got effects but are particularly weak. Having this in defense mode means you do need something like a Blue Eyes White Dragon in order to get over this. It does make itself out to be a bit of a sitting duck, but then again, if this is actually gotten rid of, you do get to just special summon a plant type monster to replace it. And there are some other monsters that are these princess monsters, which are plant types as well, that have this kind of stat lineup, but actually more on their offensive form in their attack rather than their defense. Secret Sect Druid is a dark attribute spellcaster type level 4 with 1800 attack and 0 defense. The effect is, when this card is normal summoned, you can target one level 4 dark attribute monster in your graveyard with 0 attack and or defense, except itself. Special summon that target in face-up defense position. Its effects are negated. You can only use the effect of Secret Sect Druid once per turn. I think this card was either used by, Vector within the Yu-Gi-Oh! Zeal, and that was his support for the deck. It basically had the ability to let you go into a rank 4 Exceeds monster, which is perfectly fine, and it meets conditions for doing that relatively easily. Most of the cards within this archetype don't have this condition anyway, so they'll either have 0 attack or 0 defense, and so they're useful. Potentially you could go for other monsters if they meet this condition as well, but it does mean that, your monsters are having their effects negated, so it doesn't make any sense to run anything directly outside of this support when it has its very limited archetypal support anyway. TgX1HL is a quick play spell card with the effect target one attack genus monster you control. Its attack and defense each become half its current attack and defense, and if they do, destroy one other spell or trap card on the field. This is a decent effect, considering this can be used during either turn. If you decide that actually you're not going to go heavily into your battle phase during your turn, or you've used an effect which prevents you from going into the battle phase, you can always use this just to wipe out one of your opponent's spell or trap cards. Alternatively, if they're trying to go into one of your monsters, could potentially reduce the attack of your monster. You will probably take more damage, but you might get rid of something that they have which is quite powerful, such as like Power of the Guardians. Rika Flurries is a continuous spell card with the effect, if a Rika monster you control is tributed, except during the damage step, you can make your opponent tribute one monster they control, their choice. You can only use this effect of Rika Flurries once per turn. Once per turn during your opponent's end phase, if you control a face-up non-plant monster, destroy this card. So the good thing about this card is your Rika monsters are always going to be in a position where they need to be tributed or they need to tribute something else, and this forces your opponent to take that effect on, which the negative part of the effect, that makes them punished and puts them in a position where they're actually extending and losing their resources rather than yourself. Rika Tranquility is a normal trap card with the effect, when you activate this card, you can also tribute one plant-type monster. Special summon one Rika monster from your graveyard in defense position. If you tributed a monster when you activated this card, special summon one plant-type monster from your graveyard in defense position. You can only activate one Rika Tranquility per turn. What I love about this card is it's really flexible and lets you just tribute a plant monster to special summon a Rika monster. And of course, that meeting that condition means you can then go into another plant type monster, so you can extend your advantage that much further and potentially go into some synchros or exceeds plays using this card. The next card is Blasting the Ruins. This is a normal trap card with the effect, you can only activate this card if there are 30 or more cards in your graveyard. Inflict 3,000 points of damage to your opponent's life points. I remember actually getting this card as a kid and actually think it was really good, but it really isn't. Have a maximum frame within your deck of 30 cards. So unless this is pretty much the last card you activate, you're not going to meet this condition anyway, and it's very, very low chance of you getting it to work. The other condition is it doesn't make your opponent lose 3,000 life points, it's only 1,500 because of the whole nerfing of burn effects to reduce it by half. If anything, I would say this is one of those cards where they need not touch it, because actually if you can leave it at the 3,000 points of damage, there is such risk on using this card that I don't think it should be nerfed for this reason. Hydrogenix is a water attribute machine type synchro monster. It's a level 6 with 2,300 attack and 1,800 defense. Requires a GNX Controller plus one or more non-tuner water attribute monsters to summon it. When this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, you gain life points equal to the attack of the destroyed monster. This is very similar to something like Elemental Hero Steam Healer. It's got basically the same kind of effect. Not saying it's a bad effect, actually being able to recover your life points is always going to be useful, especially since this is one of the more consistent ways of doing it. And this can continually do this as long as you've got this card out. It's not a once per turn effect or a hard counter effect, which means if you can somehow get this card to attack multiple monsters in a turn, you're getting that much more life points back, as well as potentially damaging your opponent. Alien Warrior is an Earth attribute reptile type level 4 with 1,800 attack and 1,000 defense. When this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, place 2 A counters on the monster that destroyed it. If a monster with an A counter battles an alien monster, it loses 300 attack and defense for each A counter during damage calculation only. Okay, so this is one of the cards which is part of the alien archetype, a series of monsters that like to distribute A counters upon your opponent's monsters, and that basically has this effect where it reduces the attack points of your opponent's monsters. The downside of this is not all of your monsters actually trigger this effect, where there is a stat reduction. Some of them don't do that at all, which means your opponent's monsters can have these A counters, but they're not being punished for having them. They're simply on your opponent's monster. So it's a major downside and a major flaw to how the alien archetype works. And hopefully in the future they will look to redesign them to a point where they can actually be used. GNX Controller is a dark attribute machine type tuner monster. It's a level 3 with 1,400 attack and 1,200 defense. Now you might be looking at me thinking a normal type tuner monster is not going to be particularly useful, but actually within the GNX archetype, to get your synchro monsters out, this card is a key component to synchro summoning. Alternatively, you can use things that can trade out on this card's name. but typically you do need to have at least a couple of copies of this in your deck to at least have some consistency in going into your synchro monsters. Sylvan Hermitary is a fire attribute plant type level 8 with 2700 attack and 1800 defense. The effect, once per turn, you can activate the top card of your deck, and if it is a plant type monster, send it to the graveyard, and if you do, draw one card. Otherwise, place it on the bottom of your deck. If this card is excavated from the deck and sent to the graveyard by a card effect, look at up to 3 cards from the top of your deck, then place them on the top of the deck in any order. So this is one of the more powerful versions of the Sylvans in the archetype. It's pretty much the most powerful monster they have. To be able to do this and excavate your monsters means that they can actually trigger their own effects when they're sent to the graveyard. And of course, you get the bonus of drawing an additional card. If not, it's not going to be that big of a deal. They go to the bottom of the deck, which is fine, because if you've got multiple Sylvans, you can trigger this effect multiple times. And that means your deck is never in a position where it's kind of firm and where your cards that are on the bottom of the deck are guaranteed to stay there for the rest of the duel. Of course, this has its own effect where if it's part of this being sent to the graveyard, you're then able to determine what you want on the top of your deck, because you're able to top deck your cards in the order that you desire to be able to trigger those additional effects. Ritual Raven is a dark attribute fiend type level 1 with 300 attack and 300 defense. If you ritual summon a dark ritual monster, this one card can be used as the entire tribute. One of the best tribute monsters for summoning a ritual monster you have out there. You know, you're having to get rid of this ritual spell already to summon the monster, and this being the entire cost means it's very flexible. It can meet any condition of summoning any dark ritual monster. You can think of some of the best ones out there, and this is definitely something you would want to run so long as you've got dark ritual monsters in your deck. Poppy Plant is a wind attribute plant type tuner monster. It's a level 1 with 0 attack and 0 defense. The effect, once per turn, you can target one other plant type monster on the field. It has a level. This card's level becomes that monster's current level until the end of this turn. You might be looking at me thinking, what's the point of this card? Is it actually going to do anything? Well, actually, I'll stop you right there. Kiza considered this to be one of her key cards. It was one of the tuners alongside, I think it was Twilight Rose Knight, that was used often to synchro summon into Black Rose Dragon. The ability to manipulate its levels according to the other monsters you have on the field means that you can actually summon things quite easily. She also had a trap card, I think it was a continuous trap card, which could force your opponent's monsters to become plant-type monsters on your turn. It's either your turn or your opponent's turn, and that meant you can actually just use this effect to copy one of your opponent's monsters if that's preferable to your situation. World's Carrot Weight Champion is a dark attribute plant type level 4 with 1900 attack and 0 defense. If this card is in your graveyard, you can send one plant type monster from your hand or face up from your field to the graveyard, except itself, special summon this card. You can only use this effect of World Carrot Weight Champion once per turn. Right, so this is a reoccurring effect, so this is essentially why this card is as useful as it is. Many of the monsters that have these types of effects have an effect where once they've been resummoned from the graveyard, they are then banished and therefore cannot be accessed as quickly. This doesn't have that effect. It might be a once per turn effect, but actually if you just continually send plant types from the hand, that means actually it's beneficial. Some of them might have effects that trigger in the graveyard, such as Rose Lover, or you can get some of the big beatstick monsters in the graveyard and then revive them with some of your other cards. I think there's a continuous card which lets you special summon a plant type monster if you generate 3 tokens or 3 counters on it, and definitely that's how the archetype likes to work. Bale of Darkness is a continuous spell card with the effect during your draw phase. If you draw a dark monster, you can reveal any number of them, send them to the graveyard, then you can draw 1 more card. This is a decent effect if you've got a monster that you draw into that maybe you don't need for the time being, or maybe one that has an ability such as, I think, Necro Gardener, that can be sent to the graveyard, and once it goes there, it has an additional effect. And obviously, drawing into an additional card maybe might be better. It's just for consistency purposes, but it's definitely something you might consider running within a pure dark attribute build type of deck. The kind of downside is, if you don't draw into a dark attribute or if you draw into a spell or trap card, it's not doing anything and it's kind of just sitting there on the field, wasting a deck slot that you could have chosen something better for. Brainwashing Beam is a continuous trap card with the effect select one monster with at least one A counter on your opponent's side of the field and take control of that monster. In each of your end phases, remove one A counter from that control monster. If all A counters are removed from that monster, or that monster is destroyed, destroy this card. So the best thing about this is it gets to snatch steal one of your opponent's monsters. You can then tribute it. That way you no longer have this attached with that card. You can Xyz summon. The kind of disadvantage of using either an Xyz summon or a synchro summon means you're actually going to have to keep this continuous trap card on the field, so it does waste your spell and trap zone. And the final card is Dark Smog. This is a continuous trap card with the effect once per turn you can target one monster in your opponent's graveyard, discard one fiend type monster, and if you do, banish that target. This is really useful if your opponent has any graveyard based effects, because this can be activated during your opponent's turn, essentially, to be able to just get rid of anything. The disadvantage is, if you're not running the traditional cards that you need to, the Dark World cards which have the discard effect, then it's pretty much you're going minus every turn, because if they've got effects that can be activated in the graveyard and weren't intending to use them,